You know what question I get asked more than almost any other? It's not about black holes or the Big Bang or whether aliens exist. It's this. Neil, do you believe God created the universe? And I'll be honest with you, it's a complicated question. Not because the science is complicated, but because the question itself means different things to different people. So let me take you on a journey through what we know, what we don't know, and what it all might mean. Let's start with what we can actually measure, what we can observe, what science tells us about the universe's origin. The Big Bang, about 13.8 billion years ago. The universe emerged from an incredibly hot, dense state. Space itself began expanding. Matter and energy came into existence. We have evidence for this, lots of evidence. The cosmic microwave background, the abundance of light elements, the expansion of space, galaxy formation, all of it points to the same story. The universe had a beginning. That much is clear. But here's where it gets interesting. What does beginning mean? What happened before the Big Bang? What caused it? These are profound questions. And the honest answer is, we don't know. Not yet. General relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, it breaks down at the Big Bang. The equations give us infinities. Singularity, which is physics' way of saying, I don't know what's happening here. We need a theory of quantum gravity to understand what happened at time zero. And we don't have one yet. String theory might give us answers. Loop quantum gravity might. Something else might. But right now, we're working on it. So when someone asks, did God create the universe? What they're really asking is, what caused the Big Bang? And the scientific answer is, we don't know yet. But we're investigating. We're gathering data. We're developing theories. That's not a cop-out. That's how science works. We don't pretend to know things we don't know. We admit uncertainty and we keep searching. Now, here's where people sometimes get confused. They think science is trying to disprove God or prove God, but that's not what science does. Science investigates natural phenomena. It looks for patterns, laws, mechanisms, things we can test and measure and predict. God, as most people conceive of God, is supernatural, beyond nature, outside the realm of scientific investigation. You can't put God in a test tube. Can't measure divine intervention with instruments, can't design an experiment to detect the supernatural. So science simply doesn't address the question. It's outside our domain, like asking a plumber to fix your legal problems. Wrong tool for the job. But that doesn't mean we can't think about it. We can. We should. Just with clear understanding of what science can and can't tell us. Let me tell you about something called the God of the gaps. It's a phrase that describes a particular way of thinking about God and science. Here's how it works. Throughout history, when people didn't understand something, they attributed it to God. Thunder and lightning, the gods are angry. Diseases, divine punishment. Earthquakes, God's wrath. But as science advanced, we found natural explanations. Thunder is atmospheric electricity. Disease is caused by microorganisms. Earthquakes result from tectonic plate movement. The gaps in our knowledge got filled with natural explanations, and God retreated to the remaining gaps. This puts God in a precarious position. Because as science advances, the gaps get smaller. There's less room for God to hide. Some people find this threatening. They see science as pushing God out of the picture. But other people, including many religious scientists, don't see it that way at all. They'd say God isn't in the gaps, God is in everything, the whole system, the laws themselves. Einstein had an interesting perspective on this. He talked about Spinoza's God, not a personal God who intervenes in human affairs, but God as the sum total of the laws of nature, the order and harmony of the universe itself. Einstein said, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of all that exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind. That's a very different conception of God. Not a being who creates and then intervenes, but the very fabric of existence, the laws that govern reality. Is that God? Depends on your definition. And that's the thing. The word God means different things to different people. For some, God is a personal being, a father figure, someone who listens to prayers, who performs miracles, who has a plan for each individual. For others, God is more abstract, the ground of being, the ultimate reality, the reason there's something rather than nothing. These are very different concepts, and they have very different relationships with science. A personal God who intervenes in nature, who performs miracles, who suspends natural laws. that God is potentially in conflict with science, because science assumes natural laws are consistent, reliable, universal. But a God who is the laws themselves, who is the reason the universe exists at all, that God is in conflict with science, that God and science are asking different questions. Science asks, how does the universe work? God asks, why does the universe exist? These aren't competing answers. They're different categories of question. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're looking at a pot of boiling water. A scientist might explain it by talking about heat transfer, molecular motion, phase changes. That's the how. But you could also explain it by saying, I wanted tea. That's the why, the purpose, the intention behind it. Both explanations are valid. They're just answering different questions. And neither one negates the other. Some people think the universe is like that. Science tells us how it works. Religion tells us why it exists. Two different magisteria, as Stephen Jay Gould put it. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with this. I'm just laying out the terrain, showing you how different people think about this. Now let's talk about the origin of the universe, because this is where the God question gets most intense. The Big Bang. 13.8 billion years ago, everything emerged from an incredibly hot, dense state. Space, time, matter, energy, all of it. What caused that? What came before? One answer is nothing came before. Time itself began at the Big Bang. Asking what came before is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question doesn't make sense. Stephen Hawking talked about this. In his model, time becomes space-like near the Big Bang. The universe has a finite age, but no boundary, no edge, no before. It's hard to visualize, but mathematically, it's consistent. Another possibility. The universe emerged from a quantum fluctuation, a random event in the quantum vacuum. The vacuum isn't empty. It's seething with quantum activity, virtual particles popping in and out of existence. Energy fluctuations. In quantum mechanics, things can happen without cause. Particles can appear spontaneously. It's probabilistic. Random. Maybe the universe is a quantum fluctuation that happened to expand rather than collapse. A bubble of space-time that inflated and became everything we see. Lawrence Krauss wrote a book about this. A universe from nothing. The idea that quantum mechanics allows the universe to emerge without a cause. Some people object to this. They say the quantum vacuum isn't really nothing. It's a field, a structure. It follows laws. So where did those come from? Fair point. Maybe the quantum vacuum isn't the ultimate answer. Maybe there's something deeper, or maybe nothing is impossible. Maybe existence is necessary. Maybe why is there something rather than nothing is the wrong question, because nothing was never an option. These are deep philosophical waters, and science can only take us so far. But here's what I find fascinating. The more we learn about the universe, the less we need a God hypothesis to explain how things work. The planets orbit the sun because of gravity, not because angels push them. Life evolved through natural selection, not through special creation. The diversity of elements came from nuclear fusion in stars, not from clay on day one. Every natural phenomenon we've ever investigated has turned out to have a natural explanation. Every single one. That's a pattern, and patterns are meaningful. Does that prove God doesn't exist? No. Proof and disproof aren't how this works. But it does change the conversation. If you don't need God to explain how things work, then the question becomes, why invoke God at all? Some people say, because God set up the laws. God created the initial conditions. God is the first cause, the unmoved mover. This is deism. The idea that God created the universe and then stepped back, let it run according to natural laws. It's an elegant idea, compatible with science, unfalsifiable, which means you can't prove it wrong, but also can't prove it right. You're essentially saying God did it, but in a way that looks exactly like God didn't do it. Which raises the question, what's the difference? If God's action is indistinguishable from no action, does the distinction matter? This is where we get into philosophy and metaphysics and personal belief. Science can't settle this, but let me tell you what troubles me about the God created the universe answer. It doesn't actually answer anything. It just pushes the question back one level. Okay, God created the universe. But where did God come from? Who created God? God is eternal. God doesn't need a cause. That's the usual answer. But if God can be eternal, uncaused, why can't the universe be eternal? Or the laws of physics? Or the quantum vacuum? Why is God has always existed, satisfying, but the universe has always existed isn't, it seems like special pleading to me. Making an exception for God that you won't make for anything else. Now, some theologians have sophisticated responses to this. They talk about necessary versus contingent existence, about God being outside time, about different categories of being. These are interesting arguments. I'm not dismissing them, but they're philosophical, not scientific. And from a scientific standpoint, we prefer explanations that don't multiply entities unnecessarily. Occam's razor. The simplest explanation that fits the data is usually right. If we can explain the universe without invoking God, then scientifically we should. Not because God doesn't exist, but because we don't need that hypothesis to make predictions and understand observations. Let me tell you about fine-tuning, because this is probably the strongest argument for design. For a creator, the universe's fundamental constants, they're very precisely calibrated. The strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, the charge of the proton, the cosmological constant. If any of these were even slightly different, the universe would be radically different. Stars wouldn't form, atoms wouldn't be stable, life would be impossible. The odds of all these constants having just the right values by chance, astronomically small. This is called the fine-tuning problem. And it's real. It's not a creationist talking point, it's a genuine scientific puzzle. So how do we explain it? Three main options. One, God did it. A creator fine-tuned the constants to allow life. We exist because someone wanted us to exist. Two, we're in a multiverse. There are countless universes, each with different constants. We're in one that allows life because we couldn't exist in the others. Selection effect, anthropic reasoning. Three, there's some deeper law we don't know yet that requires the constants to have these values. They're not arbitrary, they're necessary for some reason we haven't discovered. Which one is right? We don't know. Each has problems. The God explanation requires accepting something we can't test or measure. It's metaphysical, not physical. The multiverse explanation requires accepting countless unobservable universes. It feels extravagant, though some versions of inflation predict it naturally. The deeper law explanation is speculative. We don't have the law yet. We're hoping it exists. None of these are slam dunks. The fine-tuning problem remains open. But here's what I notice. The God did it explanation tends to shut down inquiry. If God fine-tuned the constants, there's nothing more to investigate. That's just how God wanted it. The other explanations keep the door open. They motivate research, the search for a deeper understanding. And historically, that's been productive. Every time we've said this is just how it is and kept investigating, we found deeper explanations. Maybe that'll happen with fine-tuning, maybe not. But I'd rather keep looking than assume we've hit bedrock. Let me talk about complexity, because people often point to the complexity of life as evidence of design. Look at the human eye, or a cell, or DNA. These are incredibly complex, sophisticated systems. How could they arise by chance? This was William Paley's watchmaker argument in the 1800s. If you found a watch on the ground, you wouldn't think it assembled itself randomly. You'd know someone designed it. Similarly, looking at life's complexity, shouldn't we infer a designer? The problem with this argument is that Charles Darwin answered it in 1859. Natural selection. Complexity doesn't arise by chance. It arises through a process. Small variations, differential survival, accumulation of beneficial traits over millions of generations. Each step is small, incremental, but over time, you get dramatic complexity. We've observed this in labs, in the wild, in the fossil record. Evolution is a fact. Natural selection is the mechanism. You don't need a designer to get complexity. You just need time, variation, and selection pressure. Now, some people accept evolution but say God guided it. Theistic evolution. God works through natural processes. That's a theological position, not a scientific one. Science doesn't need that hypothesis. Evolution works fine without divine guidance. But if you want to believe God set up the laws that allowed evolution, science can't contradict you. It's outside our scope. Here's what I think is the heart of the matter. The question isn't really, did God create the universe? It's, do we need God to explain the universe? And the scientific answer is increasingly, no, we don't. We can trace cosmic evolution from the Big Bang to galaxies, to stars, to planets, to life, to consciousness, all through natural processes. No miracles required. That doesn't prove God doesn't exist. But it does mean God isn't a necessary part of the scientific explanation. So the question becomes personal, philosophical. What do you believe? What gives your life meaning? For some people, believing in a creator is essential. It gives them purpose, comfort, a moral framework, connection to something greater than themselves. I respect that. I'm not trying to take that away from anyone. But for me personally, I find wonder and meaning in the natural universe. In the fact that we're made of star stuff, that we're the universe's way of knowing itself. I don't need a creator to feel awe. The cosmos is awe-inspiring enough on its own. Carl Sagan put it beautifully. The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. That moves me. That gives me a sense of connection and purpose. We're part of an unbroken chain, stretching back 13.8 billion years. From the Big Bang to now. Every atom in your body forged in the heart of a star. You're literally stardust contemplating stars. That's poetic. That's profound. And it's literally true. Do I believe God created the universe? I don't know. I don't think that question is answerable scientifically. But I know we don't need that hypothesis to understand how the universe works, to trace its history, to predict its future. And I know that the natural universe, without any supernatural overlay, is magnificent enough, mysterious enough, wonderful enough. Let me tell you about something Einstein said. He was asked if he believed in God, and he said, "I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with fates and actions of human beings." I think that's a useful distinction. A God who is the laws of nature versus a God who intervenes in nature. Science can work with the first one, maybe. It's basically a philosophical stance about ultimate reality. But science is incompatible with the second one, with miracles, with suspensions of natural law, with prayers being answered through divine intervention. Because science assumes consistency, that the laws of physics work the same way everywhere, everywhen, that experiments are repeatable. If God can intervene and change outcomes, then science becomes impossible. You can't trust patterns, can't make predictions. So most scientists, even religious ones, operate under methodological naturalism. The assumption that natural phenomena have natural explanations, that doesn't mean they don't believe in God. It means they don't invoke God in their scientific work. They might pray on Sunday, but on Monday in the lab, they follow the data. They test hypotheses. They use natural explanation. This works. Science has been phenomenally successful. We've split the atom, decoded the genome, landed on the moon, cured diseases, extended lifespans, all through natural investigation. No divine revelation needed. That's not arrogance. That's just empirical observation. Science works really well. Now, does that mean there's nothing beyond the natural? No. Science doesn't claim that. Science is agnostic on supernatural claims. We simply don't have the tools to investigate them. If God exists and occasionally performs miracles, but those miracles are rare and unpredictable and leave no measurable trace, then science will never detect them. And that's fine. That's a limitation of science. We're okay with that. But it also means you can't use scientific evidence to argue for God, because science, by its nature, can only investigate natural phenomena. Let me address something important: the relationship between science and religion throughout history. People sometimes say they're inherently in conflict, that religion suppresses science, that science attacks religion. The truth is more complicated. Yes, there have been conflicts. Galileo and the church, Darwin and religious opposition, stem cell research and religious objection. But there's also been cooperation. Many scientists throughout history were deeply religious: Newton, Mendel, Lemaitre, Collins. The Big Bang Theory was actually developed by Georges Lemaitre, a Catholic priest. He saw no conflict between his faith and his cosmology. Many universities started as religious institutions. Islamic scholars preserved Greek science during the Dark Ages. Monasteries were centers of learning. The relationship is complex, context-dependent, era-dependent. In some times and places, religion fostered scientific inquiry. In others, it hindered it. Today, in the developed world, most mainstream religious denominations accept science, evolution, Big Bang, cosmology, ancient Earth, climate science. It's mainly certain fundamentalist groups that reject these, groups that interpret Scripture literally, that see science as a threat, but they're not representative of all religious people, not even close. Most religious people I know have no problem with science. They see it as investigating God's creation, understanding how things work. They might believe God set everything in motion, but they accept the scientific description of how it unfolds. That's a viable position, philosophically consistent, personally satisfying for many. I don't share it, but I respect it. What I don't respect is denying scientific evidence because it conflicts with religious belief, rejecting evolution, claiming the earth is 6,000 years old, dismissing climate science. That's not faith. That's willful ignorance, and it's harmful. Because science isn't just abstract knowledge. It's practical. It's how we solve problems, cure diseases, feed populations, address climate change. If you reject science, you're hamstringing humanity's ability to deal with real challenges. So while I respect religious belief, I draw the line at science denial, at teaching creationism as science, at letting theology override empirical evidence. The universe is what it is, not what we wish it to be, not what ancient texts say it is. And we learn about it through observation, experiment, reason, not through revelation or authority. That's the scientific method. And it's the most reliable way we have of understanding reality. Now, let me address something personal. People sometimes ask me, Neil, doesn't it bother you that life might be meaningless? That we're just accidents? That there's no grand purpose? And my answer is no, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I find it liberating. If there's no predetermined purpose, then we get to create our own. We get to decide what matters, what's meaningful. I find meaning in discovery, in teaching, in helping people understand the universe, in contributing to humanity's collective knowledge. Others find meaning in art, or relationships, or helping others, or building things, or raising children. There's no single answer, no cosmic purpose we all have to fulfill. And that's beautiful. That's freedom. We get to choose. Some people need to believe there's a plan, that everything happens for a reason, that someone's watching over them. I understand that. I respect it. But I don't feel that need. I'm comfortable with uncertainty, with not knowing, with the universe being indifferent to my existence. Because I'm not indifferent. My loved ones aren't indifferent. Humanity isn't indifferent. We create meaning. We generate purpose through our choices, our actions, our connection. That's enough for me. More than enough. The universe doesn't owe me meaning. I create my own. And when I look up at the night sky, when I think about the vast cosmos, I feel connected, part of something bigger than myself. Not because a creator made me, but because I'm literally made from the universe. I'm a way for it to experience itself. That's transcendent. That's spiritual, even in a secular sense. I don't need God for that. The cosmos provides it naturally. Let me tell you what I think is the most honest answer to did God create the universe? I don't know. And neither does anyone else. Not for certain. We have beliefs, opinions, philosophical positions, theological commitments, but we don't have proof. Not scientific proof, not philosophical proof. Believers can't prove God exists. Atheists can't prove God doesn't exist. We're all making our best guess based on incomplete information, and that's okay. That's the human condition. We don't have all the answers. What we do have is science, a method for investigating the natural world, for building reliable knowledge. And science tells us we don't need God to explain how the universe works. Natural processes are sufficient. That doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It just means God isn't required for the scientific account. Whether you choose to believe in God anyway, for other reasons, that's up to you. Maybe God exists outside space and time. Maybe God is the reason anything exists at all. Maybe God experiences reality through us. These are metaphysical claims, philosophical claims, not scientific ones. Science can't adjudicate them. We operate in the natural realm, measuring, testing, predicting. If you want to add a layer of meaning beyond that, a theological interpretation, you're free to do so. Just don't pretend it's science. Don't try to teach it in science class. Don't use it to deny scientific findings. Keep the categories separate. Science addresses how, religion addresses why. They don't have to conflict, but they also don't have to agree. You can be a scientist and religious, or a scientist and atheist. Both work. What matters is intellectual honesty, following evidence where it leads, not forcing reality to fit your preconceptions. And that applies to everyone, religious and secular alike. Don't cherry pick data to support your beliefs. Don't ignore evidence you don't like. Don't substitute faith for investigation. Be curious. Be humble. Be willing to change your mind. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. That's how we get closer to truth. So, did God create the universe? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. But I know we're here. I know the universe is magnificent. I know we can understand it, at least partially. And I know that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. The cosmos is within us. We're made of star stuff. We're a way for the universe to know itself. Whether God made that happen or it happened naturally. Either way, it's extraordinary. And we should celebrate it, study it, protect it, marvel at it, because this is our home, this vast, ancient, beautiful universe. And we're privileged to be conscious within it, to ask questions, to seek answers, to wonder. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us special. Not that we have the answers, but that we ask the questions. Sleep well, fellow cosmic wanderers. Rest in the mystery. Embrace the uncertainty. And know that whether God created the universe or created itself, you're a part of something magnificent. You know, before you drift off, let me take you deeper into this question. Because it's not just about belief or disbelief. It's about how we think, how we approach the unknown, how we distinguish between what we know and what we merely hope or fear. Let me tell you about the history of this question. Because humans have been asking, where did everything come from? For as long as we've been human. Probably longer. Every culture has creation myths. Stories about how the world began. The gods creating land and sky. Light separating from darkness. Cosmic eggs hatching. Turtles all the way down. These stories served a purpose. They gave people a framework, a narrative, a sense that the universe made sense, that there was order, intention, meaning, and I don't dismiss these stories. They're beautiful. They're culturally important. They tell us about how our ancestors understood their place in the cosmos. But here's the thing. They're myths, not in the sense of being lies, but in the sense of being pre-scientific attempts to explain reality. Before we had telescopes and particle accelerators and the scientific method, we had stories. Narratives passed down through generations, sometimes inspired by genuine awe and wonder, sometimes by imagination, sometimes by altered states of consciousness. And different cultures came up with different stories, which tells you something. If these were revealed truths, you'd expect consistency, but there isn't any. The Hindu creation story is completely different from the Norse creation story, which is different from the biblical creation story, which is different from the Aboriginal Australian creation story. They can't all be literally true. They contradict each other. So either one is right and all the others are wrong, or none of them are literally true. They're all metaphorical frameworks for understanding existence. I lean toward the latter. These are humanity's early attempts at cosmology, before we had the tools to investigate properly. And that's not a criticism. That's just acknowledging what they are. Important cultural narratives, but not scientific accounts. Now, when we developed science, starting around the 16th and 17th centuries, something changed. We started demanding evidence. Testability, repeatability. Galileo looked through a telescope and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, which meant not everything orbited Earth. The geocentric model was wrong. Newton figured out gravity, mathematical laws describing how objects attract each other. No gods pushing planets required. Darwin explained the diversity of life through natural selection. No special creation needed. Einstein showed that space and time are relative, that matter and energy are equivalent, that gravity is the curvature of space-time. Hubble discovered the universe is expanding. Galaxies are moving apart, which means they were once together. The Big Bang. Each discovery pushed back the frontier of we don't know. And each time, the answer was natural, not supernatural. Whenever we've been able to investigate something properly, the explanation has been physics, chemistry, biology, natural processes. Never once has the answer been a God did it, and that's the end of the investigation. Never. That's a really important pattern. It doesn't prove there's no God. But it shows that God isn't necessary for explaining how things work. The universe operates according to laws. Consistent, mathematical, discoverable laws. And those laws are sufficient to explain everything we observe. So when people say God created the universe, what they're really saying is, I believe there's a deeper reason beyond the natural laws for why those laws exist at all. And that's a philosophical position, not a scientific one. Science can't address it. We can trace causation back to the Big Bang, maybe beyond, but at some point we hit a wall. the limits of what's empirically investable. And there, in that murky territory, people place God, the ultimate cause, the ground of being. The reason there's something rather than nothing. I understand the appeal. Humans don't like infinite regresses. We want a stopping point, a foundation, something that doesn't need further explanation. And God serves that purpose. You can say God is eternal, uncaused, necessary, and feel like you've reached bedrock. But have you? Or have you just labeled your ignorance? Because saying God did it doesn't actually explain anything. It's not a mechanism. It's not a process. It's just pointing at the mystery and giving it a name. If I asked you, how does God create universes? What would you say? By what process? Through what mechanism? Using what tools or power? God works in mysterious ways. That's usually the answer, which is just admitting you don't know. So you've replaced one mystery with another and called it an explanation. Whereas science says, we don't know yet, but we're working on it. We're developing theories, gathering data, testing hypotheses. Maybe we'll never know. Maybe the origin of existence is fundamentally unknowable, but we're not going to stop trying. And we're not going to pretend we have an answer when we don't. That's intellectual honesty. That's scientific integrity, admitting ignorance and continuing to investigate. Let me tell you about quantum mechanics, because it's relevant to this discussion in a fascinating way. At the quantum level, things behave in ways that violate our everyday intuitions. Particles can be in multiple states simultaneously. Superposition, particles can be entangled, affecting each other instantaneously across any distance. Non-locality, and particles can appear and disappear spontaneously. Virtual particles popping in and out of existence in the quantum vacuum. This last one is crucial because it shows that something from nothing isn't just possible. It happens all the time. At quantum scales, the vacuum isn't empty. It's seething with quantum fluctuations, energy appearing and disappearing, particles and antiparticles materializing and annihilating. This is real, measurable. We can detect it through the Casimir effect, through other experiments. So when Lawrence Krauss says a universe from nothing, he's not being flippant. He's pointing to a real physical phenomenon. Maybe our universe is a quantum fluctuation that didn't collapse. That inflated instead. That became everything we see. No creator required. Just quantum mechanics and the laws of physics. Now, theologians object to this. They say the quantum vacuum isn't really nothing. It's a field, a structure. It obeys laws. So where did the field come from? Where did the laws come from? Fair question. And we don't have a complete answer yet. But notice what's happened. We've gone from God created the universe to, well, maybe not the universe itself, but the laws that govern quantum fluctuations. The gap keeps shrinking. God keeps retreating to ever more abstract territory. And at some point, you have to ask, is this really God? Or is it just the ultimate nature of reality, whatever that turns out to be? If God is synonymous with the laws of physics, then calling it God seems redundant. Why not just say the laws of physics? Unless you want to imbue those laws with intention, purpose, consciousness. But there's no evidence for that. The laws of physics don't seem to care about anything. They just are mathematical relationships that govern how matter and energy behave. You can call that God if you want, but it's a very different God from the one most people believe in. A very abstract, impersonal God. Einstein Spinoza's God. Not the biblical God, not Allah, not Vishnu, just the abstract principle of order in the cosmos. And honestly, at that point, why use the word God at all? You're just confusing the issue, conflating personal deity with impersonal natural law. Let me talk about the anthropic principle, because it's often used to argue for design, for a creator. The anthropic principle observes that the universe has properties that allow for the existence of observers, us, life, intelligence. If the universe were even slightly different, if the fundamental constants had different values, we wouldn't be here to observe it. So, the argument goes, the universe seems designed for us, fine-tuned, which suggests a fine-tuner, God. But there's a logical flaw here. It's called selection bias. Of course, we find ourselves in a universe that allows our existence. We couldn't exist in any other type of universe. It's like a puddle thinking, wow, this hole fits me perfectly. It must have been designed just for me. No, the puddle fits the hole because that's where water collects. In any other shape hole, it would fit that shape instead. Similarly, we exist in this universe because this universe allows our existence. In universes with different constants, different observers might exist, or no observers at all. We're not seeing design. We're seeing selection effect, survivorship bias. And if the multiverse is real, if there are countless universes with different constants, then it's inevitable that some would allow life. And observers in those universes would marvel at how fine-tuned things seem. But it's not fine-tuning. It's probability playing out across vast numbers of attempts. Like the lottery. Someone wins, and they marvel at the incredible odds. What are the chances I'd win? It must be destiny. But someone had to win. The fact that it was you is surprising to you, but not surprising in general. Someone was going to be surprised. The anthropic principle doesn't require a designer. It's just a statement about selection effect. Now, I'll grant you, if this is the only universe, if there's no multiverse, then the fine-tuning is more puzzling. Why these constants? Why not others? But even then, God did it isn't a satisfying answer. It's just giving up, stopping inquiry. Maybe there's a deeper theory that requires these constants. Maybe they're not arbitrary. Maybe they're mathematically necessary in ways we don't yet understand. String theory hints at this. In string theory, the constants aren't free parameters. They're determined by the geometry of extra dimensions. By the way, strings vibrate. If string theory is correct, and if we ever figure out which version is right, we might find that the constants couldn't have been different. They're required by the underlying mathematics. No God needed, just deeper physics. But we're not there yet. String theory is still speculative, unproven. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's on the right track, but incomplete. We're working on it. And until we have answers, the honest response is, we don't know. Not God did it. Let me tell you something personal. I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly religious. We didn't go to church regularly, didn't pray before meals. Religion wasn't a big part of my childhood. So I came to science without a strong religious framework. I didn't have beliefs I needed to reconcile with scientific findings. For me, science was just how we learn about the world. No conflict, no tension, just curiosity and investigation. And as I learned more, as I studied physics and astronomy, I was struck by how everything fit together, how elegant the laws were, how much sense the universe made. I didn't need God to explain any of it. Natural processes were sufficient, beautiful, awe-inspiring on their own. The fact that we're made of stardust, that atoms in our bodies were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years ago. That's profound. That's poetic. And it's literally true. I don't need a creator narrative on top of that. The natural story is amazing enough. But I recognize that many people come from different backgrounds. They were raised in religious households, taught that God created everything, that faith is virtuous, that doubt is dangerous, and for them, science can feel threatening, like it's taking something away, undermining their worldview. I get that. I'm sympathetic to that. It's not easy to revise fundamental beliefs. But here's what I'd say to those people. Science isn't trying to take anything from you. It's trying to give you something, knowledge, understanding, truth. And truth is valuable, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it contradicts what you were taught, because false comfort isn't really comfort, it's illusion. And illusions crumble when confronted with reality. Better to face reality honestly, to admit what we don't know, to keep searching, to follow evidence wherever it leads. That takes courage. It takes humility. But it's the only way to genuine understanding. And understanding, true understanding, is more satisfying than any myth, more solid than any dogma. You might lose the comfort of thinking someone's watching over you, planning your life, answering your prayers, but you gain something else: agency, responsibility, the knowledge that your choices matter because you're making them, not because a God scripted them. You gain connection to the cosmos, the realization that you're part of an ancient, vast, evolving universe, not separate from it, not above it, part of it. You gain wonder, because the natural universe is far stranger and more marvelous than any creation myth. Quantum mechanics, relativity, black holes, the Big Bang, evolution, consciousness emerging from matter. These are astonishing, mind-blowing, and they're real. Why settle for Bronze Age mythology when you can have 21st century cosmology. Now, I want to address something. Some people say science is just another faith, that scientists believe in the Big Bang or evolution the same way religious people believe in God. This is wrong, completely wrong. And it's important to understand why. Faith is belief without evidence, or despite evidence. It's believing because you want to believe, because you were taught to believe, because it feels right. Science is the opposite. It's belief based on evidence, proportional to evidence, always provisional, always open to revision. We don't believe in the Big Bang the way someone believes in God. We accept the Big Bang because multiple independent lines of evidence all point to it. The cosmic microwave background, the abundance of light elements, the expansion of space, galaxy formation. If new evidence contradicted the Big Bang, we'd revise our understanding. We did this before with the steady state theory. When evidence contradicted it, we abandoned it. That's not faith. That's reason, empiricism, following data. Religious faith doesn't work that way. If evidence contradicts Scripture, believers find ways to reinterpret Scripture, or they reject the evidence, or they say God is testing their faith. The conclusion is fixed. The evidence gets molded to fit. In science, the evidence is fixed. The conclusions get molded to fit. That's a fundamental difference. And it's why science progresses and religion doesn't. We know more about the universe now than we did 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But religious understanding hasn't advanced. The questions are the same. The answers are the same. The methods are the same. Because religion isn't about discovery. It's about revelation, about accepting what's been handed down. Science is about discovery, about questioning, about building on what came before, about correcting errors. They're not equivalent. They're not two equally valid ways of knowing. One works, one doesn't. And we can tell which is which because science gives us technology, medicine. Understanding that translates into practical results. Religion gives us comfort, community, moral frameworks, meaning. Those are valuable. I'm not dismissing them, but they're not knowledge. They're not ways of understanding how the universe actually works. If you want to know how the universe works, you do science. If you want to know how to live a good life, religion might help, but it's not the only way, and it's not a substitute for empirical investigation. Let me tell you about something called Russell's teapot. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, posed this thought experiment. He said, suppose I claim there's a teapot orbiting the sun between Earth and Mars. Too small to see with telescopes, but it's there. Can you prove I'm wrong? No, you can't. The teapot is too small to detect. But does that mean you should believe me? Of course not. The burden of proof is on me. I'm making the claim. I need to provide evidence. It's not your job to disprove every wild claim someone makes. That would be impossible. You'd spend your whole life disproving invisible teapots, unicorns, fairies, dragons, etc. The reasonable position is skepticism. Disbelief until evidence is provided. God is like Russell's teapot. Someone claims God exists, creates universes, listens to prayers, has plans for humanity. Okay, show me the evidence. Not philosophical arguments, not ancient texts, not personal experiences, physical evidence, something measurable, testable, reproducible. There isn't any. God is undetectable, unfalsifiable, conveniently beyond the reach of any test or measurement, just like the teapot. So the reasonable position is disbelief, or at least agnosticism. I don't know if God exists, and I see no reason to believe God does. That's not a claim that God doesn't exist. That would require proof too. It's just saying the God hypothesis is unsubstantiated. And until someone provides evidence, there's no reason to take it seriously. Now, believers might say, but I've experienced God. I've felt divine presence. That's evidence for me. And I don't doubt they've had experiences. The human brain is capable of producing all sorts of subjective experiences. Mystical feelings, transcendent moments, sense of presence. But those are neurological phenomena. We can study them. We can even induce them with meditation, drugs, or electromagnetic stimulation of the brain's temporal lobe. They're real experiences. But they don't prove what people think they prove. They're brain states, not divine contact. People of different religions have similar experiences, but they interpret them through their own cultural framework. Christians feel Jesus. Muslims feel Allah. Hindus feel Brahman. Buddhists feel enlightenment. They can't all be right. The experiences are universal. The interpretations are cultural, which suggests the experiences are human, neurological, not divine. But try telling someone who's had a powerful religious experience that it was just their brain. They won't believe you. To them, it was real. It was God. And I understand that. Subjective experience is compelling. It feels true, but feelings aren't evidence, not reliable evidence. Our brains deceive us all the time. Optical illusions, false memories, cognitive biases. We can't trust subjective experience alone. We need objective corroboration, independent verification. That's why science relies on experiments, data, things multiple people can observe and measure. Personal revelation doesn't cut it. It's not sufficient. No matter how powerful it feels, let me talk about morality. Because people often say, if there's no God, how do we know right from wrong? Where does morality come from? This is a really important question. And the answer is, morality is natural. It evolved. We're social animals. We live in groups. Cooperation is advantageous. So we evolved instincts that promote cooperation. Empathy, fairness, reciprocity, altruism. These aren't divine commands. They're evolutionary adaptations. They helped our ancestors survive and reproduce. Other social animals have similar instincts. Chimps show empathy. Elephants mourn their dead. Rats help other rats in distress. Vampire bats share food. Morality is biology. It's built into our brains through millions of years of natural selection. Now, humans also have culture, language, abstract reasoning. So we've elaborated on these basic instincts, created moral systems, ethical frameworks, legal codes. Different cultures have different specifics. But the basics are universal. Don't kill unnecessarily. Don't steal. Help your group. Punish cheaters. These show up everywhere because they're adaptive. Societies with these norms function better, survive longer. God isn't needed. Evolution explains it. But people say, without God, everything is permitted. There's no objective morality. Okay, let's examine that. Is morality really objective if it comes from God? Or is it just God's subjective opinion? If God says murder is wrong, why is murder wrong? Because God says so? That's not objective. That's divine command. Arbitrary. What if God said murder was good? Would that make it good? If you say no, then you're admitting there's a standard beyond God. And that standard is the real source of morality. If you say yes, then morality is arbitrary, just whatever God decides. That's not objective either. This is the Euthyphro dilemma from Plato, and it's never been satisfactorily resolved by theologians, whereas naturalistic morality makes sense. It's grounded in facts about well-being, suffering, flourishing, things that matter to conscious creatures. Actions are right or wrong based on their consequences. Do they increase or decrease well-being? Do they help or harm? That's objective, in the sense that facts about well-being are objective. You can be wrong about what promotes well-being, but there are right answers. And we can figure them out through reason, through evidence, through examining outcomes. We don't need God for that. We need empathy and rationality. Now, I'm not saying secular people are more moral than religious people. That's not the claim. Plenty of religious people are good. Plenty of secular people are bad. Morality is complicated, individual, but you don't need God to be good. And believing in God doesn't make you good. History shows that pretty clearly. Religious people have committed atrocities in the name of God. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch burnings, jihad. The Holocaust had Christian supporters. Meanwhile, secular democracies like Norway and Sweden have some of the lowest crime rates and highest well-being in the world. Correlation isn't causation. But it's clear that religion isn't necessary for moral societies. What's necessary is empathy, rule of law, education, economic security. These promote moral behavior far more reliably than belief in divine judgment. Let me address the question of meaning and purpose, because this is often the emotional core of the God question. People want their lives to mean something, to matter, to be part of a larger plan. And religion provides that. You're created for a purpose. God has a plan for you. Your suffering has meaning. You'll be reunited with loved ones in heaven. These are comforting beliefs. I understand their appeal, but they're not true just because they're comforting. Reality doesn't care about our emotional need. And here's the thing. You can have meaning without God, purpose without a plan. You create your own meaning through your choices, your relationships, your contributions. I find meaning in teaching, in helping people understand the universe, in contributing to human knowledge, even in small ways. Others find meaning in art, in family, in helping others, in building things, in experiencing beauty. There's no single right answer. That's the point. You get to decide. And that's more authentic than accepting a prepackaged purpose from religion, because it's truly yours, chosen, not assigned. As for cosmic significance, for mattering on a universal scale, I hate to break it to you, but we don't. The universe is vast, indifferent, uncaring. On cosmic scales, we're insignificant, tiny, brief. But so what? Why do we need to matter cosmically? Why isn't it enough to matter to each other, to ourselves? The people who love you, you matter to them. The people you help, you matter to them. The work you do, if it's meaningful to you, that's enough. You don't need to be important to the universe. You just need to be important to someone, to yourself. That's a very human scale perspective. And that's appropriate because we're human. We live human lives. Human significance is the right scale for us. Demanding cosmic significance is hubris. It's ego run amok. We're not the center of the universe. We're not the point of creation. We're a species of primate on a small planet, evolved, conscious, curious, temporary, and that's okay. That's beautiful. That's enough. Let me tell you what I think is the most intellectually honest position on the God question. Agnosticism. Not knowing, I can't prove God doesn't exist. That's impossible. You can't prove a negative, especially for an unfalsifiable claim. But I see no evidence that God does exist. No reason to believe the hypothesis. So I live as if God doesn't exist. I don't pray, don't worship, don't make decisions based on divine command. But I admit I could be wrong. If evidence appeared, I'd reconsider. I'm open to that. That's agnostic atheism. The position that we don't know if God exists, but we see no reason to believe God does. It's different from Gnostic atheism, which claims to know God doesn't exist. I think that's overconfident. We can't know that. And it's different from agnosticism in the 50 over 50, could go either way sense. That's fence sitting. False equivalent. The evidence is heavily weighted toward naturalism, toward a godless universe. Not conclusively, but heavily. So while I admit uncertainty, I lean strongly toward atheism, provisional atheism, based on current evidence. If that evidence changes, my position changes. That's rationality. Whereas religious belief tends to be fixed, dogmatic, immune to evidence. That's the key difference. And it's why I prefer the scientific approach. Let me end with this. The question, did God create the universe, is ultimately unanswerable. Scientifically, we can trace causation back to the Big Bang, maybe beyond, but at some point we hit the limits of empirical investigation. And there, in that fog of uncertainty, people place God, or they don't. It's a choice, a philosophical choice, not a scientific one. What science can tell you is that you don't need God to explain how things work. Natural processes are sufficient. The universe operates according to laws. Those laws are discoverable, understandable, beautiful. Whether you want to call those laws God is up to you. But it's not the God of the Bible, not the God of the Quran, not a personal deity who intervenes in human affairs. It's at most an abstract principle, the ground of being, the reason there's something rather than nothing. And maybe that question has no answer. Maybe existence is just a brute fact. Maybe why is there something rather than nothing is a category error. Maybe nothing was never possible. We don't know, and that's okay. What we do know is that we're here. We're conscious. We can ask these questions, explore these mysteries, and that's remarkable. That's a privilege. That's something to celebrate. Whether God created us or we're accidents of chemistry and evolution, either way, we're part of something vast and ancient and beautiful. The cosmos, this magnificent, mysterious, knowable universe. And we get to study it, understand it, be awed by it. That's enough. That's more than enough. So sleep well, rest easy. Don't worry about whether God exists. Worry about whether you're living well, treating others with kindness, contributing something positive, learning, growing, experiencing joy. Those are the things that matter. The things within your control. The universe's ultimate origin, that's for cosmologists to work on, for philosophers to debate. For you, right now, it's enough to know that you're here. You're part of this cosmic story, this grand adventure. And tomorrow, when you wake up, you'll have another day to be curious, to ask questions, to seek truth. That's what makes life meaningful. not having all the answers, but pursuing them. Good night, fellow seeker. Sleep well in the mystery. You know, there's one more dimension to this question that I think is worth exploring before you drift off to sleep. It's about what happens when we mix science and religion inappropriately. When we try to force them into the same conversation in ways that don't work, I'm thinking specifically about intelligent design. This movement that tries to dress up creationism in scientific clothing, tries to sneak religious belief into science classrooms by calling it science. It's not science. Let me tell you why. Intelligent design says, look at complexity in nature. The bacterial flagellum, the eye, blood clotting cascades. These are irreducibly complex. They couldn't have evolved step by step because removing any part breaks the whole system. Therefore, they must have been designed by an intelligent designer, who they carefully avoid calling God, but we all know what they mean. The problem is, this isn't how science works. Science doesn't say, we can't explain this yet, therefore magic. Science says, we can't explain this yet, so let's keep investigating. And when we do investigate, we find evolutionary pathways, precursors, intermediate forms, ways these systems could have evolved gradually. The flagellum, it shares components with simpler systems. It could have evolved by co-opting existing parts for new functions. This happens all the time in evolution. The eye? We see every intermediate stage in existing animals, from light-sensitive patches to cup-shaped retinas to primitive lenses to complex camera eyes. Evolution of the eye isn't mysterious. It's well documented. Intelligent design is an argument from ignorance. I can't imagine how this evolved. Therefore, it didn't. That's not logic. That's failure of imagination dressed up as insight. And it's not science because it doesn't make testable predictions. It doesn't propose mechanisms. It doesn't suggest experiments. It just says God did it and calls it a day. That's not investigation. That's surrender. Real science has explained so much that seemed inexplicable. Lightning, rainbows, the diversity of life, the origin of species, the formation of planets, the life cycle of stars. Every time, the answer was natural, not supernatural. Electromagnetic discharge, refraction of light, natural selection, gravitational accretion, nuclear fusion. Why should we expect this time to be different? Why should complexity require a designer when everything else we've studied doesn't? It's special pleading, it's intellectual laziness, and it's dangerous when it gets into education. Because if you teach kids that complexity implies design, you're teaching them to stop asking questions, to accept mystery instead of investigating it. You're crippling their scientific literacy, their critical thinking, their ability to distinguish between real explanations and pseudo-explanation. And in a world that increasingly depends on science and technology, that's harmful. We need citizens who understand how science works, who can evaluate evidence, who don't fall for pseudoscience. Teaching intelligent design undermines that. It privileges religious belief over empirical investigation, and it violates the separation of church and state. Courts have recognized this. Every time intelligent design has been challenged legally, it's been struck down because it's religion, not science. And that's appropriate. Keep religion in religious settings, churches, homes, theology classes, philosophy classes, maybe as one perspective among many. But keep it out of science class because it's not science. Now, I want to talk about something else. The role of religion in society. Because even if God didn't create the universe, religion still exists, still matters to billions of people. And I think we need to be honest about both its benefits and its harms. On the positive side, religion provides community, belonging, social support networks. Studies show religious people tend to be happier, healthier, live longer, not because God blesses them, but because community is good for humans. We're social animals. Isolation kills us. Connection sustains us. Religion also provides moral education, ethical frameworks, teachings about compassion, forgiveness, humility, service to others. These aren't unique to religion. Secular philosophies teach them too, but religion packages them effectively with stories, rituals, traditions, community reinforcement. And for many people, religion provides comfort in suffering, meaning in tragedy, hope beyond death. These are valuable, psychologically, socially valuable. I don't dismiss them. But religion also has a dark side, and we need to acknowledge it. Religion divides people, creates in-groups and out-groups, believers and infidels, saved and damned,